For nearly 60 days, relentless and brutal combat had yielded nothing. Allied forces remained trapped in their Normandy beachhead, unable to shatter the German lines that had contained them since the invasion began. That all changed on July 25, 1944, when the American Army initiated Operation Cobra. With breathtaking speed, the 7 Corps of the U.S. First Army pulverized the German positions along the Perrier-Saint-Lô Highway. This rupture in the front quickly expanded as the 8th Corps liberated Avranches just 6 days later. On the following day, Lieutenant General George S. Patton's U.S. Third Army surged into the Brittany Peninsula and southern Normandy. The initial puncture had evolved into a full-scale breakout. While the Americans advanced, the British and Canadian forces to their east had been engaged in a grueling war of attrition. Since the June landings, they had successfully pinned down the majority of Germany's Panzer divisions in Normandy. With American forces now rampaging through the German rear, reinforcements became scarce. The Germans were forced to start pulling units away from the British and Canadian front. Recognizing the opportunity, the British launched Operation Bluecoat on July 30th, striking towards Vire and Mount Pinçon on the American left flank. General Sir Bernard Montgomery, the Allied ground commander, anticipated that the American success would force the Germans to pivot their entire line eastward. He knew the British had to exert maximum pressure to support the American operations west of St. Lo. 2 days later, Lieutenant General Guy Simonds, the formidable 41-year-old commander of the Canadian II Corps, presented his detailed plan to Lieutenant General Henry Crerar, head of the newly operational Canadian First Army. Simonds, a hardened veteran of the campaigns in Sicily and Italy, was both tough and brilliant. His objective was clear: to smash through the German defenses south of Caen along the main road to Falaise, stopping just short of the city itself. This territory was absolutely vital to the Germans. Zoom in on a map showing the Caen-Falaise road. The area south of Caen acted as a crucial hinge, without which their entire retreating army could not swing back into a cohesive defensive line. On August 4th, the order came down to execute the plan. Montgomery's message to Crerar was filled with confidence. The situation is very good. The enemy front is now in such a state that it could be made to disintegrate completely. His vision was for the Canadians to demolish the German positions south and southeast of Caen and drive hard for Falaise. This would effectively cut off the German forces facing the British Second Army, forcing them back toward the Seine River. The massive assault was scheduled to launch no later than the 8th of August, and preferably a day sooner. But could they succeed where others had failed for 2 long months? The landscape south of Caen, through which the Canadian First Army had to advance, was a defender's paradise. The terrain was mostly open, marked by a series of ridges that gave German long-range anti-tank guns, like the feared 80 Dynamites, perfect fields of fire. German 80mm gun firing. They could wreak havoc on advancing armor from concealed positions. Fields of corn and wheat, small wooded areas, and even haystacks provided excellent cover for German tanks, machine gun teams, and infantry. The small Norman villages scattered across the area had been transformed into stone fortresses by their determined Nazi occupants. The Germans, masters of defensive warfare, had converted this idyllic countryside into an intricate network of death. Archival footage of Canadian tanks kicking up dust. Defending this sector was the 89th Infantry Division, which had just relieved the 1st SS Panzer Division on August 4th. Their strength was augmented by several motorized artillery battalions and the 3rd Luftwaffe Flak Corps. When Simonds first drafted his plan, codenamed Operation Totalize, intelligence suggested that the 1st and 9th SS Panzer Divisions were holding the front. Counterattacks were anticipated from the 12th SS Panzer Division, believed to be positioned just southwest of the front line. The Canadians were grimly familiar with this particular unit. It was comprised of fanatical young soldiers, most only 17 or 18, led by seasoned NCOs and officers from the Eastern Front. Vicious battles had already been fought between the 12th SS and the 3rd Canadian Division since early June. The fighting had grown even more bitter after reports emerged that the 12th SS had executed a number of captured Canadian soldiers. Although Simmons modified his initial strategy upon learning the 89th was now manning the front, the core concept remained unchanged. Since the terrain heavily favored the defenders, he decided on a daring night attack. Armored columns would surge down both sides of the Falaise highway, punching a deep hole through the enemy lines. This first phase involved 2 armored brigades and 2 infantry divisions. Critically, some of the foot soldiers would ride in armored vehicles, keeping pace with the tanks. To transport these troops, a brilliant improvisation was made: welding and grinding sounds. M7 self-propelled 105mm guns, known as priests, were converted into armored personnel carriers. Canadian and British engineers worked grueling 18-hour shifts, removing the main guns and welding on extra armor plates, some scavenged from beached landing craft. In just 3 days, they created 72 of these makeshift carriers, nicknamed kangaroos, each capable of holding 12 men. Other vehicles like half-tracks and universal carriers would also be used. Navigating a massive force of men and armor across unfamiliar, hostile territory in total darkness was a monumental challenge. So how could Simons ensure his column stayed on track? He devised several ingenious solutions. Artificial moonlight would be created by bouncing powerful searchlight beams off low clouds to illuminate objectives. Beaufort's anti-aircraft guns firing tracer rounds would mark the boundaries for the advancing columns. Furthermore, 2 radio signals, one broadcasting dots and the other dashes, would be aimed at the columns. As long as a tank's radio operator heard a continuous series of both dots and dashes, they were on course. Hearing only one or the other meant they were straying too far east or west. And as a final failsafe, there were always maps. After considerable negotiation, air support was secured to bomb the flanks of the Canadian advance just before the assault. Once the bombing ceased, the artillery would unleash a massive rolling barrage as the columns moved forward. While 720 artillery pieces were allocated, only half would fire in the initial phase. The main preparatory strike would come from heavy bombers delivering a crushing blow to the German defenses. Following this, 2 more armored divisions would exploit the breach, either smashing through to Falaise or positioning themselves for a rapid push northeast towards the Seine. On the night of August the 7th, the Germans launched their own counteroffensive against the Americans at Mortain. Field Marshal Gunther Hans von Klug, the supreme German commander in the West, had scraped together every available Panzer unit for Operation Lüttich. His desperate gamble was to retake Avranches and sever Patton's Third Army. That very same night, Operation Totalize commenced. Visual: night footage of bombers overhead. As 1,019 RAF bombers thundered above, the tanks of the Canadian 2nd Armored Brigade and troops of the 4th Brigade, packed into their armored carriers, formed into columns 4 vehicles wide. They waited on the west side of the Falaise Road for the signal. On the east side, tanks from the 33rd Armored Brigade and soldiers from the 154th Highland Brigade of the 51st Highland Division mirrored their formation. The remainder of the brigades would advance on foot, tasked with eliminating German positions bypassed by the armored spearheads. At approximately 11:30 p.m., Halifax and Lancaster bombers began their attack, using red smoke and green flares to identify their 5 designated targets on each flank. However, dust and smoke from the initial explosions obscured the target areas, preventing a full bomb drop. Despite this, a staggering 3,462 tons of bombs rained down on the German lines, though with varied effectiveness. Some targets were barely scratched. As the air raid concluded, the artillery began its thunderous barrage. The Bofors guns opened up, their tracer fire streaking across the night sky to guide the armored columns, which had started to roll forward. Almost immediately, massive dust clouds choked the battlefield, severely limiting visibility and making navigation a nightmare. The artificial moonlight proved less effective than hoped, diffused by the swirling dust and smoke. The advance became even more chaotic as tanks and carriers had to swerve around newly formed bomb craters. Despite these immense challenges, the majority of the armored force managed to reach their initial objectives. Throughout the night, the Highland columns pushed forward under enemy fire, distant explosions and machine gun fire. Some tanks were set ablaze and a few priest carriers were hit. The 1st Black Watch of the 154th Brigade dismounted from their vehicles as artillery shells pounded the village of St. Aignan. Tanks from the 1st Northamptonshire Yeomanry added their own fire to suppress the village. When the shelling lifted, the infantry stormed and secured the town, bracing for the inevitable German counterattack. To their right, the 7th Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders and the 144th Royal Armour Corps captured Kremesnil around 7 a.m. An hour and a half before that, the 7th Black Watch and the 148th Royal Armour Corps had seized Garcelles-Sequeville, north of the other regiments. Other infantry objectives proved far tougher to take. Totalize Campaign, just a mile south of the starting line, was a particularly hard nut to crack. The 2nd Seaforth Highlanders of the 152nd Highland Brigade were tasked with clearing this bypassed village, but their attack was bloodily repulsed by the entrenched German defenders. A company from the 5th Seaforth Highlanders was sent to reinforce them, but after taking heavy losses, they too were forced to pull back, allowing artillery to saturate the town with shells. The rest of the 5th Seaforth Highlanders were then ordered to take the town at first light, but a heavy morning mist delayed their assault. A squadron from the 148th Royal Armour Corps was recalled from Garcelles-Sequeville to provide support. With the crucial assistance of the tanks, the village finally fell into Allied hands. Meanwhile, the village of Lorguichon, which sat astride the main highway, was captured by the 5th Queen's Own Cameron Highlanders. With this, the 51st Division and 33rd Armored Brigade had secured their primary targets. On the west side of the highway, the Canadian 2nd Division and 2nd Canadian Armored Brigade were battling through the dust and smoke, encountering intense German fire that claimed several of their tanks. One column drifted far to the east, heading towards the German-held town of Rocancourt. The Royal Hamilton Light Infantry, riding in their armored vehicles, managed to drive straight through the town and reach their objective. The Essex Scottish of the same brigade were not so lucky. A number of their half-tracks were destroyed by a well-placed anti-tank gun. Pinned down by German resistance, it wasn't until noon that the Essex Scottish finally reached their assigned position. The Royal Regiment of Canada, also of the 4th Brigade, completely missed their objective in the darkness and disembarked north of a location designated Point 122. Trailing behind the armored columns, the 6th Brigade advanced on foot towards their objectives. The South Saskatchewan Regiment, following closely behind the artillery barrage, swept through Rocancourt, keeping the German defenders pinned down. The town was taken quickly, and around 4:30 a.m., a returning German patrol was ambushed and captured. The Fusiliers Mont-Royal were assigned the task of taking Marie-sur-Orne on the western flank. Heavy bombing was supposed to have neutralized any significant German resistance there. Unfortunately for the Fusiliers, the bombs had mostly missed the village. They were met with withering fire that halted their advance. Artillery support was called in, and a second flanking attack was launched around 4:30 a.m., but this too failed. The village was only taken later that afternoon when Crocodile Churchill flame-throwing tanks were brought in to support the infantry. Southeast of the Fusiliers, the Queen's Own Cameron Highlanders' attack on Fontenay-le-Marmion also ran into serious trouble. The preparatory bombing of the village had been largely ineffective. Braving intense artillery and heavy machine gun fire, the Camerons managed to capture the northern part of the village and successfully fought off enemy counterattacks throughout the morning. With assistance from 2 companies of the South Saskatchewan Regiment and a tank squadron, the area was finally secured, and a large number of German soldiers were taken prisoner. The Canadians and Highlanders in this first phase of Operation Totalize had punched nearly 6,000 yards deep into the German lines. The soldiers immediately started digging in to consolidate their gains. They knew more counterattacks were coming soon. Watching the heavy bombing late on August 7th, Standartenführer Kurt Meyer, commander of the 12th SS Division, knew a major Allied offensive was imminent. He rapidly began to organize his forces, which were at reduced strength with only 1 battle group present. The rest of his division was engaged elsewhere. His unit had been ordered west to reinforce the battle at Mortagne, but that move was canceled the moment Operation Totalize began. Meyer drove to the front lines early on August 8 to assess the situation himself. What he witnessed was alarming. The Canadian Army was on the cusp of a major breakthrough. He had to stop them, at least until the 85th Infantry Division could arrive and establish a new defensive line north of the Laison River. Meyer soon encountered panicked soldiers from the 89th Division retreating down the road. Coolly lighting a cigar, Meyer stood in the middle of the road to intercept them, asking if they intended to leave him to fight the British alone. After shaming the soldiers into turning around, Meyer proceeded to the 89th headquarters. There, he conferred with the division's commander and the leader of the 5th Panzer Army, outlining his plan for a swift counterattack. Unwilling to wait for his other 2 battle groups to return, Meyer ordered Battle Group Waldmüller into immediate action. His attacking force was composed of Tiger and Mark IV tanks, self-propelled guns, and an infantry battalion. Around noon, Meyer set his force in motion, heading north. More Allied bombers were spotted overhead. Meyer commanded his tanks and men to get as close to the enemy as possible, hoping to avoid becoming casualties of friendly fire from the air. The main thrust of Meyer's counterattack fell upon the Scottish positions near Saint-Aignan de Craménil. The legendary German tank ace Michael Wittmann, leading the Tigers, charged into battle, followed by Mark I's Jagdpanzers and other assault guns. However, they drove straight into a deadly trap. With British and Canadian tanks from the Northamptonshire Yeomanry, 144th Royal Armour Corps, and Sherbrooke Fusiliers positioned on 3 sides, Wittmann's assault was decisively repulsed. 5 Tigers were destroyed, including Wittmann's. The celebrated ace was killed in the action. The German armor attack persisted, with Sherman's and Mark IV's blasting each other at close range until the fighting finally subsided, around 1:45 p.m. Then, about 200 German infantry launched an assault. They were met by a hail of artillery and machine gun fire from British tanks, which completely shattered their attack. By the end of the engagement, the Germans had lost 15 tanks. The British had lost 20. But how would the Allies press their advantage? While the German counterattack was being blunted, The second phase of Operation Totalize was getting underway. A massive formation of 678 B-17 flying fortresses from the U.S. 8th Army Air Force began a new bombing mission, SFX roar of B-17 engines. Approaching from the west in two waves and enduring heavy German anti-aircraft fire, the bombers dropped their payloads along the Canadian 1st Army's front. Unfortunately, flak, smoke, and low clouds prevented 180 of the B-17s from releasing their bombs. Worse, 12 bombers veered north toward Caen and mistakenly bombed friendly troops. Shortly after, another 12 bombers made the same catastrophic error, inflicting more casualties on the Canadian 3rd Division, hitting an ammunition depot, artillery regiments, and a Polish anti-aircraft unit. To compound the tragedy, the bombs that did hit German positions failed to shatter their defenses. With the flawed bombing run complete, the Polish 1st Armored Division, serving with the Canadian 1st Army, roared southeast past the Scottish troops. They would not get far. German anti-tank guns and hidden armor in the woods a mile southeast of Saint-Aignan halted the Polish advance, knocking out 40 of their tanks. To the west of the main highway, the Canadian 4th Armored Division struggled to advance past Gomesnil due to entrenched German anti-tank guns. The impasse was finally broken when the Canadian Grenadier Guards and the Lake Superior Regiment executed a wide flanking maneuver to the west, clearing the enemy guns from an orchard north of Cinto. The village itself was then secured with a tank squadron from the South Alberta Regiment and soldiers from the Argyll and Sutherland Regiment. Two companies pressed onward, capturing the village of Haumesnil. This marked the furthest point of the Canadian advance on August 8th. The depth of the Canadian penetration deeply alarmed the German High Command. They understood that if the Canadians achieved a full breakthrough, the 7th Army fighting to the west and a portion of the 5th Panzer Army could be completely encircled. That night, the remnants of the 89th and 12th SS divisions were ordered to form a new defensive line north of Potigny. Meanwhile, Simons urged his 4th Armored Division to push forward relentlessly. On the afternoon of August 9th, Bretteville-le-Rabais, Haumesnil-Quarry, and Langaneri all fell to combined infantry and tank attacks, resulting in the capture of numerous prisoners. Not every aspect of the advance went smoothly, however. Lieutenant-Colonel Don Worthington was ordered to take his armored unit, the British Columbia Regiment, and a supporting infantry unit, the Algonquin Regiment, to capture a strategic high point known as Point 195. As they pushed deep into enemy territory, enemy fire and the darkness of night separated parts of Worthington's battle group. His reduced force became lost, ending up on the east side of the highway at Point 140, which they mistakenly believed was their objective, Point 195. Taking up a defensive position among some hedges and trees, Worthington radioed brigade headquarters to report that they were on their objective. The Germans quickly became aware of Worthington's isolated position and began to mobilize against him. For most of the day, the Canadians, aided by 2 Typhoon fighter bombers overhead, fought off repeated German attacks. Polish armor, which had taken Robert Mesnil and was pushing south, attempted to break through to Worthington's beleaguered force, but was repulsed by fierce German resistance. With most of his tanks destroyed, Worthington ordered his remaining 8 tanks to make a run for it. They successfully reached the Polish lines. The infantry, however, continued to hold their ground, but with casualties mounting, including Worthington himself, who was killed by a mortar bomb, their situation grew increasingly desperate. By late evening, as the Germans closed in for a final assault, the surviving Canadians made a break for the Polish lines. A single day's fight cost a generation's price. August 9th had been a brutal day for the British Columbia Regiment, which suffered 116 men killed, wounded, or missing, and lost 47 tanks. The Algonquin Regiment sustained 128 casualties. The Governor-General's Foot Guards, with a company from the Algonquin Regiment, were ordered to advance on Point 195 and relieve Worthington. The Foot Guards encountered heavy resistance at Quesnay Woods, about 2,000 yards north of Potigny, which was held by a 12th SS Battle Group. After losing 26 tanks, they were unable to clear the woods and establish a defensive position. Symonds, furious, demanded that Point 195 be taken. The task now fell to the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders, while the Lincoln and Welland Regiment was assigned to capture Point 180 to the northwest. Both regiments opted for a night attack. By daylight on August 10th, the Argylls were on their objective and digging in. The Links also took their objective, but not before one of their companies stumbled into a German-occupied village, sparking a vicious firefight. With Point 195 finally in Canadian hands, the Grenadier Guards were able to push their tanks past the infantry onto Point 206, which was rumored to be heavily defended by 80mm guns. At noon, however, a 12th SS Battle Group attacked first. They were driven back, but any further plans to take Point 206 were abandoned. Meanwhile, the Polish 1st Armored Division was ordered to capture Point 140 and then push across the Laison River to seize Point 168 a few miles north of Falaise. German counterattacks stalled the Polish advance, preventing them from reaching their objectives. The German stronghold at Quesnay Woods continued to hamper their movement, and Symonds wanted it taken before the German 85th Infantry Division, which was beginning to arrive, could reinforce the 12th SS elements still holding it. The Canadian 3rd Division was given the difficult job of clearing the woods. 2 regiments from the 8th Infantry Brigade, the Queen's Own Rifles, and the North Shore Regiment were sent in with artillery support. Fighting raged into the night, but the Canadians could not dislodge the defenders. As the battle for the woods died down, so too did Operation Totalize. It had driven 9 miles into the German lines and inflicted around 3,000 casualties, but the decisive breakthrough had not been achieved. With the German offensive at Mortain repulsed by the U.S. 30th Division, Lieutenant General Omar Bradley, now commanding the U.S. 12th Army Group, saw a golden opportunity. He could trap the entire German 7th Army between Falaise and Argentan, map showing the developing pocket. Montgomery agreed, and on August 11th ordered Crérard not just to take Falaise, but to push further southeast towards Argentan to link up with the 15th Corps of the U.S. Third Army. This would block the only remaining escape route for the Germans. Pushing north, the 15th Corps was halted just outside Argentan on August 12th, but managed to seize control of the east-west highway, allowing them to shell the retreating Germans. Only 15 miles now separated the Americans from the Canadians near Falaise. Patton wanted the 15th Corps to drive on to Falaise, but Bradley ordered him to halt at the edge of Argentan. Allied intelligence had warned that the Germans were massing for a counterattack against the 15th Corps. Bradley would later state that he preferred a solid shoulder at Argentan to a broken neck at Falaise. He was also concerned about a potential friendly fire collision between the converging Canadian and American forces. In addition to ordering Crérard to take Falaise, Montgomery also directed Lieutenant General Miles Dempsey to push his British Second Army towards the town. To support the British 13th Corps advance, the Canadian 2nd Division was dispatched to assist. By August 13th, Claire Trison had fallen to the Canadians. During the night, they crossed the Laise River and captured Point 176. After fighting off a counterattack by a 12th SS Battle Group, the Canadian 6th Infantry Brigade was positioned just 6 miles northwest of Falaise. Symonds formulated a new plan, Operation Tractable. Its long-term goals were to break through the remaining German defenses, capture Falaise and the high ground to its northeast, and then pivot southeast towards the village of Troon. Simon's concept was similar to Operation Totalize. The German defenses would first be pounded by RAF bombers and then shattered by armored columns, with infantry mopping up any bypassed resistance. The key difference? This new operation would be launched in broad daylight using a massive smoke screen for cover instead of darkness. Holding the German line north of the Laison River was the newly arrived 85th Division and remnants of the 89th, supported by 88mm guns and a 12th SS battle group. Another 12th SS battle group was positioned in the rear near Troon. Shortly before Operation Tractable was set to launch, disaster struck. A Canadian officer carrying a copy of the complete operational plans accidentally drove behind enemy lines and was killed. The Germans now had the Allied playbook. Would this intelligence allow them to stop the attack before it even began? On August 14th at 11:40 a.m., Canadian tanks and armored vehicles surged forward as artillery blanketed the front with smoke. Just before the ground assault, over 800 Halifax, Lancaster, and Mosquito bombers unleashed their payloads on 5 target areas. In a tragic repeat of the previous operation, 77 bombers mistakenly bombed their own troops near Potigny. The Army was using yellow flares for identification, but the Air Force was tragically using similarly colored markers for their targets. Over 390 Canadian and Polish soldiers became casualties, with 150 killed. Despite this horrific start, tanks from the Canadian 2nd Armored Brigade rolled on through the smoke. The Fort Garry Horse and the 1st Hussars endured heavy anti-tank fire as they advanced to the Laison River. The 1st Hussars fought through fierce resistance on the north bank and managed to cross over. By 11:30 p.m., the Fort Garry Horse had also reached their first objective, but at the cost of a third of their tanks. The 1st Hussars suffered even heavier losses, but also secured their position. North of them, the 4th Canadian Armored Brigade ran into trouble at Point on 140, facing enemy anti-tank guns, tanks, and mines. While one tank regiment engaged the Germans, the other 2 pushed onward, fighting their way across the Laison to reach their objectives, but not before their brigade commander was killed in action. Behind the armored spearhead, the 8th and 9th Infantry Brigades of the Canadian 3rd Division, packed into kangaroos and other vehicles, dealt with the bypassed German strongpoints. The Stormont, Dundas, and Glengarry Highlanders moved on a fortified chateau held by the German 85th Regiment and supported by Tiger tanks. A 6-pounder anti-tank gun knocked out one of the Tigers, while a Wasp, a Bren gun carrier with a flamethrower, incinerated the machine gun nests. As the Glens consolidated their position, an M10 tank destroyer moved up and dispatched the remaining enemy Tigers. Besides taking many prisoners on the first day of Tractable, the Canadians were now across the Laison River. Falaise was within their grasp. German resistance, however, stiffened as they fought desperately to keep the escape gap open. August 15th saw the 4th Armored Division pushing northeast of Falaise toward Point 159. The division's 4th Armored Brigade, leading the charge, was stopped cold by intense 88mm anti-tank fire. Meanwhile, the 3rd Division, advancing down the main highway, was ordered to make an attempt on the same point. The village of Solange, defended by 89th and 12th SS troops with Tigers, stood in their path. The Royal Winnipeg Rifles suffered 50% casualties in a failed attack. The Canadian Scottish Regiment, with tank support from the 1st Hussars, swung east toward Point 159. They too were halted by German anti-tank guns. The infantry pressed on alone, enduring a heavy mortar barrage. In a brutal slugging match with troops from the 12th SS, the Canadians finally took their objective. The Germans immediately counterattacked with Tigers and armored cars. In desperate close quarters fighting, the Canadians held on and drove off the enemy. By nightfall, the regiment had suffered 130 casualties. While the Canadians fought for Point 159, the Polish 1st Armored Division was ordered to move east and take Yort on the river dives. They succeeded, capturing 120 prisoners and destroying several Panzers and anti-tank guns. The Poles were now perfectly positioned to advance on Troon. On August 16th, von Kluge finally received permission from Adolf Hitler to withdraw from the Kettle, as the Germans called the pocket. The situation for the Germans had worsened with new American and French landings in southern France. Kluge, however, would not oversee the withdrawal. He was recalled by a suspicious Hitler who feared he was negotiating a surrender with the Allies. In reality, Kluge had spent much of the day pinned down in a ditch by Allied fighters strafing his convoy. Field Marshal Walter Model was ordered to replace him. En route back to Germany, Kluge bit down on a cyanide capsule and died. The 6th Infantry Brigade of the Canadian 2nd Division entered Falaise on the 16th. After 2 days of fierce house-to-house fighting against die-hard SS troops, they secured the ruined town. While the battle for Falaise raged, Simons shifted his other forces for the final push on Troon. Polish armor was already rolling toward the village. The day before, Montgomery had assured Bradley that once Falaise was taken, he would order Simons to head for Troon and link up with the Americans. The noose was tightening. With Falaise, a key pillar of the German escape route, now in Allied hands, the Germans shifted their defense eastward to hold the gap open. They attacked the American 90th Division on the high ground at Le Bourg-Saint-Léonard, hoping to deny them the key position overlooking their retreat. The Americans were initially pushed back, but regrouped and recaptured the ridge. The Canadian 4th Armored Division began its advance on Troon, but was thrown into confusion by heavy enemy artillery. They altered their route and, by nightfall, were just 2 miles north of Troon. The Poles continued to push back German resistance, halting for the night near the highway northeast of Troon. The American 90th Division was ordered to take Chambois, 4 miles southeast of Troon. The Poles advanced on the village as well, setting the stage for the final link-up. On August 18th, the Polish commander, Major General Stanislaw Maciek, split his division. One part would continue toward Chambois, while the other would seize a critical ridge dominating the road from Chambois to Vimoutier. The Poles named this ridge Makzuga, the Polish word for mace. Meanwhile, the Canadian 4th Armored Division captured Troon. Overhead, Allied aircraft relentlessly pummeled the retreating German columns in the shrinking pocket. The South Alberta Regiment, with a company of Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders, was then ordered to take St. Lambert-sur-Dive, a village between Chambois and Troon. Commanding this small force of 15 tanks and 55 infantrymen was Major David Currie. Their objective lay directly in the center of the German escape route. The desperate Germans were massing for a final, violent breakout. At 6 p.m., Currie's small force moved out. After taking friendly fire from the Poles, one of his tanks was knocked out by an enemy 88 mm. Then 2 RAF Spitfires attacked the column, setting Currie's own tank on fire. He was nearly killed trying to extinguish the blaze when the Spitfires returned to strafe them again. After tending to the wounded, Currie ordered his tanks to hold position near St. Lambert. As darkness fell, he scouted the town to locate the 88 mm gun. Back with his men, he planned his attack. The next morning, he led the assault. A tank was immediately knocked out, but the culprits, a Tiger and a Mark IV, were spotted. Currie's tank destroyed the Mark IV, while his infantry took out the Tiger by killing its crew and dropping a grenade down the turret. The Canadians then systematically cleared St. Lambert, capturing numerous prisoners. That afternoon, the true hell began. Hordes of retreating Germans descended upon the Canadians. St. Lambert was the key to their escape. A stone bridge in the town could support their heavy armor. The entire German army funneled into one small town. Fighting intensified as the Germans swarmed the tanks. Currie, in a moment of extreme desperation, called an artillery barrage down on his own position, warning his men to take cover just moments before the shells rained down. The barrage broke the German attack. Around 6 p.m., 2 understrength companies arrived as reinforcements. Even so, Currie was forced to pull his men into a tight perimeter for the night. While Currie clung to St. Lambert, the Poles and Americans finally met at Chambois. The Falaise Gap was officially closed, but holding it shut would be another matter entirely. The Canadian 3rd Division arrived just in time to block a desperate German breakout attempt. August the 20th was a day of savage fighting as SS troops and paratroopers launched fanatical attacks from within the pocket. The situation at St. Lambert became critical, with Currie's small force pushed into the western part of the town. Yet they held on, pouring fire into the German masses. The Polish forces on the Mgzuga Ridge fought heroically against SS troops trying to overrun their isolated position. With artillery observers calling in fire and every able-bodied man firing a rifle, they held their ground. The Poles suffered over 1,400 casualties, a third of their fighting strength. After they repulsed the final attack around noon on August 21st, the Canadian 4th Armored Brigade finally reached them. On that same day, Currie, whose tiny force had taken around 2,100 prisoners and inflicted massive casualties, was finally relieved. For his incredible leadership at St. Lambert, David Currie would be awarded the Victoria Cross. If you appreciate stories of such incredible bravery, please show your support for WW2 Unfold by hitting the like button. The Falaise Gap was sealed. Approximately 50,000 German soldiers were captured in the pocket. Another 10,000 were killed. Although 20,000 managed to escape, they left behind most of their heavy armor and equipment. The Canadian First Army had suffered nearly 5,500 casualties since the start of Operation Totalize. Allied Commander Dwight Eisenhower, touring the area 2 days later, described scenes that could only be imagined by Dante. He said it was possible to walk for hundreds of yards, stepping on nothing but dead and decaying flesh. But in the grand strategy of the war, the sacrifice